All right. Well, welcome. I'm sure you're familiar with this image. When I was young, I saw Jaws as a kid, as an 11-year-old living in England at the time, and it scared the heck out of me. Um, but I met another kind of shark when I was a first year teacher. I am currently the executive director of 403bwise.org, but I'm a longtime elementary and middle school teacher, and I've also taught at the college level and also served as an administrator. It was way back in 1993, actually, when I was a first year elementary school teacher. And you're seeing a picture of the staff from my school in Southern California, good old McKinley Elementary School. So I was on the job about 3 months, and the kids had left for the day. I was in my classroom, I was at my desk frantically trying to get ready for the students the next day, as first year teachers do, when a woman poked her head into my door. And I'll never forget what she said to me. She said, "Do you care about your financial future?" That is a jarring question to get anywhere, but particularly when you are a first year teacher trying to get ready for the next day's instruction. I really think there's only one answer to this question. Yeah, I care about my financial future. She took that as an invitation to come into my room, and she started talking about these investments, which I had no idea about. I had never learned about any of this in my teacher preparation program. I had some vague idea of a pension, but that was it. I politely listened. I told her, if I'm interested, I'll get back in touch. Well, thankfully, I never got back in touch with her because over the next several years, I learned she was selling me and my colleagues unsuitable, high commission, expensive products. And the more I learned, the angrier I got. I got so angry that I decided to launch a website to help teachers. So in the year 2000, I launched 403B Wise, and our mission was the same then as it is today: education and advocacy. We want to be a place where teachers and school employees can come and learn about the working of the 403B and other teacher retirement plans. And we want to be a place where we can provide them tools and resources to advocate for lower cost investment choices. In 2019, thanks to the generous support of another nonprofit, NextGen Personal Finance, who make and create excellent free personal finance curriculum for middle school students and high school students. And I've actually used it in a college class I teach. They reached out to us and they loved our mission, and they offered to financially support us and allow me to leave my job as an associate dean at the University of Redlands to run 403B Wise full time. And when we were discussing this, one of our key goals was helping pre service teachers, because unfortunately, they are so vulnerable to the sales agents who send mass emails to them and also sit in the staff lounges and come into teachers' classrooms. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Scott Downhauer, my podcast partner and fiduciary advisor.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Scott Downhauer. I'm a certified financial planner, owner of Meridian Wealth Management. Although I'm not here in the capacity of an advisor tonight, the work that I do with 403B Wise is not to take on new clients from. But I have a similar story to Dan, except my wife is a school teacher. She teaches middle school science, and about 20 years ago, she had a very similar experience to Dan. A gentleman walked into her classroom, said he was sent by the California State Teachers Retirement System and by the school district to explain to her her retirement benefits. So she thought I might be interested to know about her retirement benefits as well, invited me down to her classroom. And about 5 minutes in the conversation, I realized that this guy was trying to sell her high cost financial products, and asked him to leave. I thought it was really weird that people were just wandering around school campuses, and decided I didn't want to have anything to do with the 403B. It was just a strange product. And then a few months later, a colleague of my wife's asked me to take a look at a product that she had been sold, and it was just the worst product I had ever seen. It had surrender period of like 20 years. If she wanted to get out of it, it was going to cost her 18% of the amount of money that she put into it. It was just crazy. So at that point, I jumped on the internet, typed in 403B, and up came this website, 403B Wise. And that's where I met Dan and a whole bunch of other advocates. And we've been touring the country, writing books, doing podcasts, and as Dan said, in 2019, we got the opportunity to start this nonprofit, and just love doing it, and really appreciate the three guests we have today. I think you're going to learn a lot.
Thanks, Scott. Appreciate it. So it's quick disclaimer, nothing presented or discussed should be construed as investment or tax advice. This can be secured from a vetted fiduciary advisor. At a minimum, your advisor should hold a CFP. On the homepage of 403bwise.org, at the bottom of our homepage, we have we believe is an excellent resource you can use if you are interested in finding the right kind of advisor. And I would describe that as a fiduciary advisor, someone who pledges to put your interests above theirs. So I would like to give a free copy of my book, Teach and Retire Rich, to any pre-service teacher who is on this call. So if you are on this session, please email me at dan@403bwise.org, and I will get a copy of this book out to you. I would love to know where you're going to school and what grade level you are going to teach. So if you can include those items, that would be excellent. And I will show this information again at the end. But I hope I give away a lot of books. Okay, so we are going to start we've got three excellent guests, each of whom has been gracious enough to appear on our Teach and Retire Rich podcast. And I will post a link to each of their podcasts while they're answering questions. I'll post that in the chat box. But we have three excellent guests, and we're going to start off with Eric McCleary. Eric is a instructor at Illinois College. He's a former middle school teacher, and we love hearing this. He is married to a teacher who we met, and he has three adorable kids. I don't know how you do it, Eric. You have to be so busy, because it looked like they were all under the ages of 4. And I miss those days, but I remember it's a good thing you're a young guy. And I think your background is physical education. You probably need that kind of stamina. Is that right?
Yeah, so my background is physical education. There's never a dull moment. And you're right. We have twins who are 3-year-olds and an 8-month-old as well.
Wow. Just awesome. Looks like a wonderful family. And again, thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule. So I have a couple questions for you. What was your experience, Eric, with the 403B when you were a middle school teacher?
Yeah, so my very first experience was actually through my wife. She became a teacher a couple years before me. And so she actually signed up when she became a teacher. And then I got a job in the same district at New Berlin. And the same advisor that she had was the person who was giving his sales pitch at our teacher orientation. So he provided lunch for all of us new teachers. And he was an AXA employee. He went through his sales pitch, and then he signed up a bunch of teachers right there, then and there at lunch. So I signed up too. He didn't discuss fees. He didn't really explain what an annuity was, but he got us locked in right then and there. And then fast forward about 3 years, I actually got the job here at Illinois College, and I started learning a little bit more about 403Bs, and I did not like what I heard at all. So I contacted him and started asking some questions, and he asked me to call him so we can talk through everything. And I thought that was perfectly fine. So I called him and we talked through everything. And at least I thought we were talking through everything. And after that phone call, I was thinking, he really didn't answer any of the questions that I asked him. He just skirted around everything that I asked. So after that, we had a few email exchanges that were not overly kind. And he was still not very upfront about the fees. But at that point, since I had separated service, I was just very done with him and AXA. And so I rolled over my 403B into my new 403B here at Illinois College, which is run through TIAA.
Yeah, and TIA is one of those companies that we think teachers should look at. They offer a variety of low cost investments, and again, that's a big factor in how much you're going to ultimately save for retirement. How much you pay investments, and Eric touched on it. They are not going to tell you what their investment fees are, because a company like AXA, it's north of 2%. A company like Fidelity Investments, TIAA, Vanguard, you can get investments that are about 0.2%. And over a 30-year career, that could be a $300,000 difference. Okay, Eric, what courses do you teach at Illinois College?
Yeah, so my primary position is dedicated to teaching physical education courses. However, I also teach education courses, specifically Education 101, which is, the introductory course. It's a foundational course. And I have actually some of my students here tonight. And I teach that basically every semester. But then I teach all of the PE courses, which there's a number of them. And then I also teach a couple of kinesiology courses, which is one of our new majors here at IC. Just a couple of the general kinesiology courses like exercise physiology. I teach introduction to kinesiology. So I kind of have three different areas: general education, physical education, and kinesiology.
And you're not required to teach personal finance, but you took it on your own to go ahead and start teaching this. What has this been like, and what has the reaction of your students been?
Yeah. Uh, so about a year ago, I guess it was maybe slightly less than a year ago, I was listening to your podcast, and I got to thinking, well, after you said we want pre-service teachers to learn this stuff, and I got to thinking, well, that's what I do. This is what I should be presenting to my students. They need to know this before they get to the sales sharks. And so I just kind of said I'm going to do it, and I asked my department head, and she's super supportive. She was like, yeah, you can talk to the student teachers. That's no problem at all. So we actually set up a couple of dates where I'd actually get to talk to the student teachers. Originally, we had planned for me to talk about general finances first, and then specific finances for teachers like the 403B and pension systems. But then COVID just threw everything into mayhem. So I actually didn't get to do an in-person session with the student teachers. What I did get to do was the entire college all of a sudden started scrambling for convocations, and they wanted everything to be recorded and put online. And I was like, well, hey, that might be something I can do. So I put in my request, and I was able to do a recorded convocation for the entire campus, just on general finances. So I talked about stuff like budgeting, getting an emergency fund, talked about a lot of the big expenses that they might incur, like student loans, transportation, housing, all that kind of stuff. And then I also talked about just preparing for their future. So talking about just general investing tips. And so that went fairly well. Again, I didn't get to interact students during it, but I was able to interact with a couple of students afterwards. And there were somewhere around 100 students that watched it, which is pretty good for 1,200, or I guess we're closer to 1,300 students now. So that was the first experience I got to have. And then immediately after that, I was able to record a video for our student teachers. And again, that was focused on 403Bs, and then also talking about IRAs and Roth IRAs, because I was telling them that 403Bs might not be the best way to go. So I talked about alternative retirement accounts, and then I also went over their pension, just so they could understand a little bit better. Because when I was a teacher, I really had no idea what the pension was going to be, how it was calculated, anything like that. And it isn't until more recently where I actually dug into those details, where I started to understand it better. So that was the student teacher presentation. And then I was actually able to give another presentation at the Illinois Physical Education Conference here this past fall, where all the Illinois PE teachers get together and talk about how to be great PE teachers. Well, I put in a request to do a presentation to the pre-service physical education teachers and is accepted. And so I gave a very similar presentation to those pre-service PE teachers that I gave to our student teachers. And then I'm really excited this upcoming spring, I was accepted to do another campus-wide convocation where again, I'll be focusing more on general finances. And I'm really excited because that one actually will get to be in person. I'll be able to do it live and get to interact with students. That's really what's been missing from this. I've had a few interactions after the fact where they just reach out to me and ask a couple of things, but I haven't been able to interact with students during. So I'm really excited for
Eric, can we clone you
that.
and
uh,
distribute you across all the colleges of education around the country?
well,
Um, and in the link to the podcast interview with Eric, we also link to his presentations, at least the two you did in the previous semester, so you can access those there. Okay, so you're at the college level. You were a middle school teacher. What do you think is possible at the college level as far as getting this information to pre-service teachers? Because we know all the demands that are on them, that are on colleges, and also state requirements. Everybody wants their own class, right? And to make things mandatory. But what are your thoughts on that? How can we get this information to pre-service teachers?
Yeah, a standalone class would be incredible, but I think we're a long way away from that right now. So maybe eventually we could get there. But right now, I think the most important thing to do is to get the word out to teacher prep programs. You guys always say people don't know what they don't know. And I think this information is just generally not known. So doing these kind of things, getting the word out, just word of mouth. I know I sent out a bunch of invites for tonight to people that I know in other teacher prep programs, but just continuing to educate people in similar positions as me. I think that's kind of the first thing that we need to know, need to do, so they just know that there is an issue that their students are going to be facing right out of college. And once they know that, I'm just sure that they're going to want to prepare their students to, to not, get bitten by the sharks when they get to their school. As far as how to do it at the college level, um, I mean, I don't know. I just look for every opportunity you possibly can to integrate it into what you're already doing, because like you said, a standalone course probably isn't going to happen right away. But there's going to be opportunities throughout the curriculum where you can actually just touch on it. So in my Ed 101 course, I talked about some of the financial issues that teachers run into. I talked about that already. I know when I teach my methods course, which is closer to student teaching, I have a little bit of time where I'm going to devote to talking about 403Bs and what they should expect. And then also, I really think during student teaching, which I fully understand how busy and rigorous student teaching is. But just figuring out a way to reach the student teachers before they graduate, so that you have that captive audience, and it doesn't have to be anything long or elaborate, but just giving some general information so they are aware of what's going to come at them as soon as they get into the school. And I think that's all very realistic. And I've started to do it here, and it's still kind of in its infancy here. I've only been doing this around a year, but if I can do it here, I think it can be done anywhere. There's nothing special about me, and nothing special about what we're doing it. Well, I think we're doing great things at IC, of course. But I think if we do it here, I think we can do it anywhere.
Oh, I really appreciate that, Eric. And again, I mentioned this on with the interview with you. Scott and I will do events for any school out there, any college of education that wants us to do an hour, 2 hours. Thanks to Zoom and all the virtual tools we have now, we would be more than happy to do that. We have on-demand learning modules on 403BYs. These are self-paced. People can work on them at their own pace. They can go through them multiple times. So I just think we need to attack this from so many different levels. Eric, really appreciate that. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, so next up is Mark Shug, and this is a real honor for me. In 2005, I began a doctoral program at the University of New Mexico, and I started thinking about what do I want to do my dissertation on? And I'm just so passionate about personal finance. I decided to look at the history of personal finance instruction in this country. And I came across Mark's research and I used it in my dissertation. So it is so awesome to fast forward, 16 years later. And I've met Mark. I've had the chance to interview him for our podcast. And I'm just so proud to have him join us today. Mark, thanks again for joining us.
It's my pleasure, Dan, and thanks for the kind words.
I love how things get paid forward. This is all the influence that we can have on students. Okay, so Mark is a professor emeritus at the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee. He also is a former middle school teacher. That is something Eric, Mark, and I all have in common, and Scott's wife, and I'm sure people on this call as well. He has written a book. So if there is a college out there that wants to do a standalone course, he is the co-author of a book called Teachers Can Be Financially Fit. And I'm here to tell you, if you are a teacher and you are lucky enough to have a course with that book, you are going to be in such a good situation when you begin your career. And even if you don't have access to that course, I think you should get the book and read the book on your own and make it sort of a self-study situation. And of course, he was uh, a guest on podcast episode 138, which again I will post in the chat. Okay, Mark, what was your experience with the 403b when you were a middle school teacher?
Something more like Eric's. I got sucked into it. I was a young teacher, young man, young married family, and same thing. Went to the meeting. Everyone's signing up. I don't know what I'm doing. I don't have the first clue about what I'm doing. I mean, I've made a couple of bonehead moves over the years, but that was a real big one. And what happened is the product I had wasn't an annuity, uh, a fixed annuity, and it sure looked good in the beginning until you started seeing the fees that were coming out. It turned out it even I got out of it, but how did I didn't roll. I had to roll it over into a life insurance product because the school district I was going to that I changed jobs had nothing, no vendors would take this. So it was a real mess, but it was a real good learning lesson too.
It's almost better to make those mistakes when you're young because they're not
Yeah,
as expensive as you make them when you're later. And again, you
that's right.
didn't know what you didn't know. You shouldn't beat yourself up. Again, we are trying to change this dynamic where unsuspecting teachers are being sold these unsuitable investments. Okay, so moving to the college level, what were some of your favorite courses to teach at the college level, Mark?
Well, by far and away, I was the director of the Center for Economic Education at UWM. So I had part of my time set aside. Anthony, this is something like what Tawny has at your university. Um, and so we do a number of workshops. We had a summer program for inner city youth, but I taught a required course called Economic Education for all the social studies majors. So that was indeed a great opportunity. So we had an opportunity to talk a little bit about the basics of economics, how to teach about that, and then the basics of personal finance and how to teach about that. And at that time, I was able to provide them. I had little grants here and there, provide some really nice curriculum materials. So when they walked out the door, they at least had, back to what Eric was saying, this wasn't a standalone course on uh, personal finance, but it was a standalone course on economics and personal finance, but it was just for the social studies majors. So it's only a tiny fraction of the whole campus. So that was a great course for me. I enjoyed it terrifically.
Yeah, it's fun. It's fun to have the experience of teaching at the K-12 level, but it's also very fun to teach at the college level. It's a different dynamic, and it sounds like you really enjoyed those courses.
You got that right. It's a very different dynamic. I
It
was
is.
teaching at middle school and high school for close to 10 years. So it does kind of orient your thinking. We know a lot of people in higher ed that never taught at all, that are in schools of education and had, taught a year, didn't even
Exactly.
teach a year. So I felt like I had a lot of experience going into it. And so the job was a real good job for me.
Yeah, I felt like it made me a better university instructor because, like you, I had about 10 years in K-12 classrooms, and I think I was able to describe things better, and I could share real life experiences with them. So, if you work at Apple Corporation, there is one 401k vendor. It's Fidelity Investments, and it's low cost investments, great mutual funds. If you work at most school districts in this country, you're going to have at a minimum 5 to 10 choices. And normally choice is good, right? If you're looking for a car, you don't want just, a blue car, right? You want choices with colors. But unfortunately, most of the choices in the 403b world are bad. Mark, what does an economist say about the K-12 403b world?
Well, we talk a lot about costs and benefits, and we want people to make well-informed decisions. And that's sort of where the rub is here. When you, there's not, I had a 403b at the university level forever, but it wasn't in a fixed annuity, right? It was every paycheck, a nice chunk went into it, and I'm nicely diversified in mutual funds. This is not what we're talking about. So it's the 403b is just a shell. It's what you put in the 403b that's important. And that's, I know, really what you're getting at is these high priced products. So, and just a quick defense of an annuity, if you want security and a guaranteed income, and that's your number one value, okay, but just let me show you the numbers, and so you need to make an informed decision. And in economics, we talk a lot about opportunity cost. And when you realize what the opportunity cost is for getting this high priced product for 40 years, uh, you might change your mind, and you might not. Well, God love you. It's a free country. You get to decide what you want to do. So that's kind of my orientation. But the trick here is to have the right information, and that's what everybody on here is talking about. And then if you can get into, if your district offers you a really good 403b plan where you've got some nice options, then you get in there. And I think a problem a lot of teachers make is they get in, oh, okay, I'll kick in 5%, I'll kick in 8%. And then they let it sit there. No, 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 no. That first year, you couldn't put in the whole amount because you just really couldn't afford it. High opportunity cost again. But as your salary goes up and you get more experience, and as you start to see that account benefit from compounding interest, oh, yeah. So I took mine in 3 or 4 bites so that finally I was maxed out on the whole thing. And then my annual meeting with my financial guy was, how much can I put in? Let's make the adjustment and let's go to work. And that 403b turned out to be a beautiful thing. But like I say, it's the product you put it in, not the shell itself is not the problem. It's what's in there is the potential problem.
I think you just really identified the core issues there, Mark. And I can speak too as someone who, when I started investing, it was like, boy, my balance isn't growing. But now at 55, it is really awesome to see the power of time and the power of compounding. So you have co-authored a book called Teachers Can Be Financially Fit. Do you want to give us a brief overview of this text?
Well, the heart of the book is it starts with the kind of conviction that teachers think they cannot be financially fit. The author team, includes Tawny Ferrarini, Scott Niederjohn, myself, and a guy named Bill Wood at James Madison University. And we did a national survey, and lo and behold, it turns out teachers just have this little cloud over their head that, oh, I love kids, I love my subject, but I'm never going to make any money. Well, yes, you can. You just have to get the right mindset, and you need some education. And we can get you on the right trail. And so kind of the first chapter is a cheerleading chapter to kind of say, you really can do this. Mindset and education. Yes, says Jessica, you're right. And then I think just maybe alluding back to something you said earlier, Dan, then something about, well, I have this state pension, so that'll take care of me. And so that also is a kind of a false move. It leads you into a false sense of security that somehow the state's going to take care of you until you realize you live in California and it's severely underfunded. or you live in Illinois and you have the worst underfunded pension in the whole United States. And so then you'd be crying out for a 403B that would give you good options inside there because you can't trust your teacher retirement. So yeah, in the book, it's the publisher, God love the publisher, Springer. You can find the book. This is the cover right here. I happen to have one. And it's called Teachers Can Be Financially Fit, Economist Advice for Educators. It's published by Springer. If you just you can go to the publisher, or you can go to Amazon, or you can send me an email and I can send you all the links. And it's really, in our survey, I'm not going to keep going on and on here, Dan, but in our survey, one of the first things that popped out is teachers think they can't make it on their existing salary, and they need to think about maybe a second job or doing some tutoring, or, so the second chapter talks about how smart moves to make a little extra income. And then we talk about transportation moves and buying that first home. And so some real practical stuff. And we've got like 3 chapters on the retirement issue. And the book is really, I know we're probably in a public school environment, but we do have strong sections on private schools, charter schools, and we even have a section on higher ed. But the biggest reason of all, okay, that teachers need to be financially fit, A, for themselves, yes, wonderful, but B, teachers are the special kind of people that can share this information with their students. And I still find that once teachers sort of see how this all works and how they can be financially fit, teachers like to teach and they want to share it with others. And that to me is one of the ultimate goals, is we want all of our young people to learn about this. And that's why the teaching profession is such an important place to get this started.
Well, Mark, as you know, the teacher attrition numbers are terrible after 5 years. The number of teachers that leave the profession, if they can become aware, not only do they have pensions, typically, they have a 403B, but they often now have something called a 457B, which in
Yes.
many ways is better than the 403B. Again, for the people on this call, these are new terms. We explain all of this on 403B Wise. One of our on-demand learning modules is about the 457B. We have podcasts on it. The other thing I want to say about your book that I really like, it's not just about retirement plans, it's about the other parts of finance. You mentioned budgeting, buying cars, buying
Yep.
homes. So it sort of covers all of the topics. And I just had a thought. I think you and Eric, your authors, and Eric should collaborate on a book called Teachers Can Be Financially and Physically Fit. What do you think of that? You think that would work?
Well, I like the whole analogy. I use this, Eric, that we all know that we should eat better and exercise. And why don't we do that? Everyone tells us we're supposed to exercise. And I explained, but the benefits of exercise, A, they're uncertain. You might not do a very good job. And B, they're in the future someplace. And the same is true for saving and investing, right? The benefits are in the future, and it's uncertain. You might get hit by a truck tomorrow, and you sacrificed for 5 years saving, and boom, you got none of the benefit of it. So that's where education becomes so critical. You have to explain to people what the opportunity cost is of not saving. And you take them to that SEC compound interest calculator, and you start showing people stuff like that, and really they go, well, why didn't somebody tell me this earlier? And that refrain that you referred to, Dan, if you're 50 years old and you're learning this, you can still do better. But boy, if you could have learned it at 25,
Yeah.
you'd be so much better off.
Well, in economics, you always talk about your future self, right? You want to be good to your future self, and that's 2 ways to do it. So, last question. What are your thoughts, having taught in higher ed for so long? What are the realistic ways that we can get this information to our pre-service teachers?
Yeah, I think I think Eric has touched on a number of things. First, I think you could think campus-wide. Even though a lot of college students have a middle-class background, there's a stereotype that somehow if you grew up in a middle-class background, you know this stuff, and that's not at all true. There are many middle-class kids that take them 10 years before they figure out what's really going on, and they may never figure it out. But I can think of just a wide variety of ways, courses, just non courses, non credit courses, kind of voluntary things people could do. I prefer voluntary over requirements. There could be for teachers. You could talk about a test. You could talk about changes in the certification rules. You could talk about importing this into the student teaching seminars. I mean, there really is. What I'd like to see is I'd like to get, and I'd be really curious to hear what Anthony has to say here is up next, is I'd like to have a meeting of deans and chancellors, but deans of schools of education and perhaps chancellors, and bring us together when we can actually get together and have a drink together and talk, but to map out some kind of way. And if we want to use just schools of ed as our impetus, that'd be just great by me. And then figure out maybe we could come up with 3 or 4 kind of recommended pathways that schools of ed could consider for their schools. And, so part of it would be talking about the importance of this, and part of it would be talking about what kind of programs we could come up with. And maybe we could incentivize some of those programs. Maybe there's some funding out there to help with things like that. So I'm going on too long here. I want to hear what Anthony has to say.
Thanks, Mark. No, I love this idea. And if we could have a similar event with 10 deans and, from different regions of the country and really begin to grow this. So I know we'll stay in touch on this issue. Thanks, Mark. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, Dan.
Okay, so up next is Dr. Anthony Scheffler. He is the guest of our current podcast, episode 148. He is the Dean of the School of Education at Lindenwood University. He is easily the best dressed person on this podcast or this Zoom session right now. He is, like me, a former elementary school teacher, and he is also an artist, and he makes really cool tables and other kinds of art, and he can maybe talk a little bit about that. And there's a link to his art. And with that, I'll turn it over to you, Anthony. Thanks again for joining us. I think you might still be on mute.
Yeah. All right, I'm good. Yeah, no, I appreciate the opportunity to be here. Very much so.
No, it's great to have interviewed you last week and then to have you on this call right now. Anthony, what was your experience with the 403B when you were an elementary school teacher? Did you have a similar experience as we did?
I think it was a pretty common experience. I think it was to some degree the way you went was influenced by, I was in the New Orleans public schools, which was at the time, and I can't really tell you how it is now because after Katrina, so many things changed, but it was pretty heavily unionized. In fact, they had just come off of a pretty difficult strike not too long before I went into Teacher Corps. And for the most part, and I don't blame the union, you kind of sit down, you do what you're told to do. It's like, hey, do this. This is a strong suggestion. Just do this. And you just kind of go along with it. And a lot of it doesn't mean no one's making you do it, but you tend to go along with it. And so I kind of went along with it, to be honest with you. You had the retirement system, and you just follow the path. And largely you follow the path, not necessarily because anyone in that unionized environment is trying, it's just that's what everybody was doing. And I do know that, I won't say exactly that they were doing it, but oftentimes there are arrangements, I guess. There's an advantage to going with one group. A union has an association with a particular group or a couple of groups, and they push you in that direction because there is a benefit to them financially.
Yeah, Scott and I have written about our concerns with our nation's biggest union, the National Education Association, for years has endorsed what we would describe as a very high cost product. Mm-hmm. It is named the NEA Value Builder. So again, picture yourself as a first-year teacher. You might have heard that, you have a supplemental retirement plan. Here's all the choices. Oh, the NEA, well, they would certainly have my best interest in mind. So that's probably the product I should go with. And that's very frustrating to us because Scott and I are both pro-union. When I was a teacher, the union was very helpful in a situation when a family member was quite sick. And I was very appreciative of that help. And again, I don't want to broad brush it. There are some unions really doing it right. Tomorrow, Scott and I are speaking virtually to a school district in New York at the request of a union official. So unions can do the right thing here. Anthony, what were your favorite college classes to teach? Because people, I think they meet deans and they think deans were always deans, but you were a college instructor. What were some of your favorite courses?
Some of the first classes I taught at the University of Alabama were primarily to do with literacy and literature. My area of emphasis at the time when I came out was reading and the psychology of reading. But I also had a strong background in statistics and research. So I kind of eventually gravitated to teaching those kinds of courses. And one of the challenges was to try to make it, I say fun. Some of my students would probably roll their eyes, but at least they realize that you not only can survive it, you can actually learn some valuable kinds of take it into life lessons. Particularly, my favorite class has always been research methods and design, because I try to apply it to realistic settings in the world. The students, not necessarily out of that first class, are going to end up being researchers. It is a foundation for perhaps some of us. So this is not so bad. I kind of like this because it really pushes a way of thinking more than memorization of design and application of that design in what could be perceived as a very sterile kind of atmosphere or context. So I like that kind of course where you can teach. It really, I think, is a lot of creative thinking around certain parameters.
Well, I can tell you from the student side of the desk, I love instructors like this who take something seemingly intimidating. I think just the name, statistics, research can send some fear down some students, but your approach to make it creative, and you said what really I appreciate, applicable in real world. And so, Anthony, you remind me of my wife in that you've got sort of the left brain, right brain. You've got the math, and you've got the creative, the art skills as well. So I definitely appreciate that. So you are a dean of a school of education. You probably know better than anyone on this session the challenges and maybe some opportunities to get this instruction to our pre-service teachers. I'm very curious to hear your thoughts on this.
No, I think, and I echo the thoughts of Eric and Mark. They're dead on. I mean, it's the everyone recognizes, I think, the problem, but I don't think they all agree on the importance of that problem, given that there are so many other things that have to be considered. But I think when you start attaching, and I think Mark went there a little bit, and I think you said the same thing, Danny, when you start attaching that problem or lack of stability in your profession eventually, or perceived lack of stability, or buying into the idea that, well, you're never going to be rich as a teacher, that may not bother the energetic person who's first going in, who's looking to help. Give it a few years down the road after you start raising a family and you start realizing that can very much influence my desire to teach or my continuation of teach. So I think you start attaching it to persistence. There's a huge problem in education with teacher persistence in the profession. I mean, we lose hundreds at the end of the third year. And I haven't seen any research, frankly, Mark, maybe you know of some, that in some way correlates that feeling or that loss of a teacher or moving out of the profession, not just with frustration with the system or those kinds of things we typically think of, but with a sense of lack of direction, is specifically financial stability, as they start to grow and perhaps don't see that their future self is going to be any different than it is right now as a beginning teacher, 3 years, which can be you have to make some sacrifices and work very hard. So I think with that in mind, that it can impact the persistence of teachers, I think you have a much stronger rationale to say, well, we've got to do something about this. Now, what do you do about it? It's almost impossible, frankly, to build a course. And I'm not real sure, even if you have a course, how you make everybody take it when we have dozens of programs and it just doesn't always fit. Programs in education, like it or not, are highly regulated, particularly certification programs. And there's only so much room. But what I think you can do, and I think is even more valuable, is to infuse that into that ability to think critically and to think critically around financial stability in 403B, whatever it happens to be. You infuse that throughout a curriculum, I think in the long run is a lot more powerful than simply a single episode where you educate someone about it. Not that those aren't valuable and not that those shouldn't augment the experience, but it's the infusion of that mentality that is huge. You talked about my course. I was thinking about some of the basic statistics that I would teach. I would always take the slant of, let me tell you all right now, statistics are the most effective tool of a liar. And you've really got to be able to look at that critically. And if you can look at that critically, you can look at it across the person who's trying to sell you a mop or the person who's trying to sell you a 403B. You have to look at it and not be afraid to ask the kind of questions that need to be asked. Infusing that kind of mentality into our teachers or any young professional, I think is one of the first things and most valuable things you can do. And then you give them the context of financial stability, the context of 403B.
Boy, I really love this, coming at it from the critical thinking lens. I think about when I was teaching at the K-12 level, so much of the curriculum felt very prescriptive, and you had to, as a teacher, use your own creativity to bring in the critical thinking lens. And I love this idea of one tool that can be used in almost all situations. So I think that is just like fantastic advice. Scott and I are buoyed by what Next Gen Personal Finance is doing, really trying to get this instruction back into middle schools and high schools. So I'm hoping we're getting more students at the college level who already have that. And then if you marry that with critical thinking, I think they become well armed to sort of fend off these sharks. Anthony, is there anything else you'd like to share before we move to the general questions portion of this?
No, not specifically. I think there is very much, as Mark was talking about, as Eric was talking about, Eric sees the need, Mark sees some of the tools and some of the depth of understanding that needs to be equated. In my position and in the position of the administrators, we need to come about with the same people and say, with the Erics and the Marks, and say, now, how do we infuse it into the curriculum given these circumstances? I think too often we say it's an either or. It's either a workshop, it's a this. Those things are appended. They're not necessarily as effective as they could be without a mechanism that we actually train our professors on how do you infuse these kinds of things or use them as examples. I'm very, as you can see, pretty passionate about that, not just with financial awareness, but with lots of things. If you can infuse it to the curriculum, you're a whole lot more likely to make an impact. But yes, you do first have to know all about it. And that's where Tawny and some of the other people that work at higher education can help.
Well, thank you so much. Okay, I just have a couple slides to share. If you have questions, go ahead and post them in the chat. Just going to show a couple items.
Dan, would you mind if I just jumped in?
Oh, yeah, please do. Yeah, go ahead.
I think Anthony makes several really, really good points. I just would make a kind of a student-oriented point that not only do we want teachers to be persistent, and someone commented in the chat, it takes 3 to 5 years to really become a good teacher. And the research is very clear about that, especially in inner city environments, the environments that we claim to care so much about, those are the teachers that are likely to leave at the highest numbers. And that's exactly at the time when they're really getting good at it. And then we lose all, and then the inner city districts all have to start over again, and they never really get their teacher core up to where it needs to be. So addressing the financial education end of that, I think, is real good. And then I kind of think a lot of our assistant professors could use this too. I used to have faculty come in. We might have just had a disagreement in a faculty meeting, not that that ever happened. And 2 minutes later, this guy's in my office saying, I'm looking at this mutual fund, Mark. What do you think I should be doing? And I'm thinking about buying a house. How can I get a down payment for my house? And I'm thinking, there's a need there too. A lot of the faculty never had anything either. And so I just wanted to lay that out there too, that there'd be a role there for some of the assistant professors themselves. So let's back to you, Dan.
Well, no, I appreciate that, because ironically today I got two separate emails from assistant professors asking financial literacy questions. So again, this is a universal need in this country. That is for sure. Thanks for adding to that, Mark. I think those are terrific comments. And I think I saw this in the chat. The other big fear is we are in a pandemic now. How many people will leave the profession, teachers, because of the demands foisted on them in such a rapid time frame? So I'm really concerned about that. Just want to note some events we have coming up. Next week, we are going to have an event on budgeting. A former teacher turned budget coach will be giving tips and suggestions on how to set up and stay on a budget. On February 11th, we're going to compare the 403B and the 457B. There's a lot of similarities, but increasingly the 457B is becoming, in our minds, a superior supplemental retirement plan. And then a wonderful person that we have met through 403B Wise, Dan Huron, who is a CFP, Certified Financial Planner, and also a certified accountant. He is going to be doing a presentation on teachers and some of the things they need to know about taxes. Every month, Scott and I do office hours where it's just an hour of questions. And as anyone who's attended those knows, it's basically me kicking back and Scott answering all the questions. And then we're really excited about an event that we're going to have at the end of February. It's called Women in Investing. And we haven't quite yet made that available for registration, but by Monday, you will be able to sign up for that event. And again, all of our events are on 403bwise.org/events. And again, our book offer, if you are a pre-service teacher or a college instructor, I want to give you a free copy of my book, Teach and Retire Rich. And Mark, you'll appreciate this. When we were doing a live presentation and we were giving out copies of the book, the person that had us there to speak said, teachers, this is not fiction. You can teach and retire rich. And we don't talk about, an opulent lifestyle. It's retiring comfortably and then also knowing that you've reaped the intrinsic rewards of being a teacher, because that's really a special, special job. And again, email me at dan@403bwise. Let us know where you're going to school and what grade level you are going to teach. Okay, and with that, we will turn it over to the questions.
We've got a number of questions, Dan.
All right, Scott, I'll let Scott manage those.
Yeah, so we've got a few financial questions. We'll do those second. We'll try to do some questions that are about pre-service teachers. One of them would be well, actually, so here's the first one: book recommendations for pre-service educators to learn the basics. I think probably this teachers can be financially fit would probably be. I think we'd be remiss if we didn't say that. That's a good one to get. Teach and Retire Rich.
There's a number of financial education books out there. So the one of the key advantages of Dan's book and my book is that it really focuses on teachers. So the whole stories are about teachers. So I think those would be great ones to start with. But hey, there's just all kinds of you go to Amazon and you'll have a bunch, but I would just go to a bookstore and look at the over on the business side there. You're going to find some financial advice books and take them from some really quality people.
And so this isn't a question that was in the chat, but I still want to ask it, and then we'll get to a couple of the other ones. First of all, I really liked what you had to say, Anthony. And it reminds me of, I think it was a Mark Twain quote: "Lies, damn lies, and statistics." I think of that like once a week, because every time I pick up the newspaper, or every time I read a blog or something, how are they manipulating me with statistics? And it reminded me of a quote that you made on our podcast last week. You said, "Be aware without being paranoid." And I wanted to bring that quote back up and kind of get your opinion. What did you mean when you said be aware without being paranoid?
Well, I mean, you have to be educated. There's a question I think that someone asked about what advice would you give for future teachers financially? And I would suggest you have to be as aware of and concerned about your financial health as you should be about your physical health. And as to Mark's point, we're not always very prudent about our physical health, but you should be. And if you're going to live a long, healthy life, you should start right away. So it's a matter of being aware, but don't be afraid of the whole idea that you can have a level of control and input into your own financial future. I think a lot of people are really intimidated by it and easily swayed if someone just comes in and starts rattling that stuff. They've got to be able to say, wait, stop. If you can't explain it to me so that I can understand it, because I'm not stupid, then you're not trying to explain it to me, or you don't understand it. I'm not afraid of this. It's not something I should be afraid of. I want to be able to trust who I talk to. That means they communicate well. So, I mean, really all I'm saying is you've got to be open to the opportunity to learn. You've got to take some of that responsibility that you're the one who's going to have to learn about it. And you're going to have to work to understand some of it, but you don't have to be afraid of it. You have to, and you certainly can't. And there are people that are absolutely paranoid about finances, and I don't want to fool with it and give it to somebody else and just hope like heck that somebody else is going to take care of them, which is usually an open door for somebody to do just the opposite and to take advantage of you.
Yeah, I think the old saying is nobody's going to care more about your money than you are. And if you don't care for your money, somebody else will, and it'll probably more of your money will become their money. So this next question I want to start with for Eric. What advice would you give for future teachers financially?
Yeah, that's, I'm going to have do a really long answer here. So how long do we have? No, I honestly, getting informed, just learning, being at events like this, reading the books that you guys talked about, asking questions, just learn as much as you possibly can. And that will give you probably even more and more and more questions that you can go find the answers to. And so just learning and paying attention to your finances are two of the best things that you can do. If you don't learn and you don't pay attention, you are probably going to end up like a lot of people in the US, and that's in a really bad position financially. But if you do learn and you do pay attention and be intentional with your finances, I think you're going to end up in a really, really good place. But there's just so many different little pieces of advice that we could give. I mean, it's just unlimited, but start learning for yourself and just keep asking questions. A really good place I like to start is tracking your expenses, though. Just knowing what you're spending your money on and how much you're spending. That's a great place to start.
And now I'll just pile in here. One thing we've learned in the pandemic is you need a good emergency fund. And you really, once you got your budget under control, then you have to figure out how you're going to pay yourself first with your savings, but you also have to make sure that you're tucking something into an emergency fund. Generally, we would say 3 to 6 months of income is in an emergency fund. Teaching is a relatively secure job, so you maybe could be on a little bit of the lower end of that. If you're a car salesperson on commission, then you want to be on the higher end of that. But somewhere in there. And the other thing that's really important now is you get your 403B set up in a really nice set of stock mutual funds or stock index funds, however you're going to do it. Then you buy and hold. The day traders just got burned today. You come in, you buy good companies, and you stay for the long hold and for the long run. Buy and hold until you're old. Buy good companies and stay with them. I was with a friend of mine, and he had just a dynamite portfolio, all these great companies that he's owned for years. And he's also working on getting the new ones. So there's a lot of basic things to get under control here. And those are just a few of them. As Eric said, we could go for quite a while on that particular question, but those are some of the first moves out of the box. Well, and the other thing is this mindset thing. Hang around with people at your school that are savvy about this stuff. Yeah, I'm getting Jay's going like this. Think about an investment club. think about connecting to people that even if you don't put much into the investment club, you learn a lot about companies and you know how to research companies. And even if you're not going to be managing your own portfolio, you're going to hire Scott to help you. That's great, but you would know so much more about what's going on. So I would seek the company of people at your school and in other environments that reinforce this culture, because the culture itself is constantly, with the social media, all the advertising we're exposed to every day is kind of pulling you away from this message of saving and investing for the long term. And so you need to hear us. It needs to be infused in the curriculum because it can't just be learned the first time. That's the real disadvantage, as Anthony points out, about one-time class. You learn it, and then the whole culture is against you, and then it all fades. Yeah,
No, I
ask the
might,
professor a question, and you get a 2-hour answer. I apologize, you guys.
I might kind of add to that too. There is a culture, and I think people that are particularly sensitive, who come out of the humanities, who feel like they sincerely want to make a contribution, they either are made to feel guilty or they carry a level of guilt that if they focus even a little bit on their own financial welfare, that somehow they've betrayed their calling. And it's just not the case. But I pick that up in a lot of young student education and otherwise, but they're so excited. And these are some of the brightest of the bright. They are just absolutely focused. And if you start talking finances, it's almost as if they feel guilty about trying to plan around money as opposed to focusing on what contribution they can make.
We addressed this early in our book, this mindset about you're somehow getting dirty if you're going to be financially successful. And then when you get to be, hey, I'm the oldest one on the call by far, someone in your family gets sick. You want to be generous. You want to help your kids. You can want to help your kids with their education. You can't be a financially generous person unless you're financially secure and independent by yourself. So yeah, we need to work on this culture end of things. The fact is, corporate America can make people very wealthy over the long run, and I know people kind of want to deny that, but it's the truth. And
Yeah,
anyone that says differently, by the way, is really misleading you and harming your financial future.
well, aren't you glad that Bill Gates didn't feel guilty about making money? I mean, he's pumped more money back into philanthropic efforts than anyone in history and continues to do so.
I want to comment on what Anthony said. He's so right. I mean, we talk to teachers every week. My wife's a teacher. I'm constantly talking with teachers, and they are constantly thinking about their students. It's all about their students. How can they change their curriculum to make it better for their students? What can we do to prop them up? And they're not thinking about themselves. Maybe Dan can help me remember this, but on one of our podcasts, one of our events, we had someone who came on and they just said the smartest thing that echoed what Anthony just said. And they said, when you get on an airplane and the stewardess tell you, hey, if something goes wrong and those little oxygen masks come down, put yours on first before assisting your child, before assisting someone else. Put that oxygen mask on, because if something happens to you, you can't help them. And that's exactly what Anthony is saying. Teachers don't help themselves.
Scott, the podcast episode is called Teachers Need an Oxygen Mask.
Oh my gosh, it was even named that. Okay.
Yep.
Yeah. And so as soon as you said that, Anthony, it reminded me of that podcast. I think that was just so good. Some people are mentioning books, and so I'll just kind of throw those out there. A lot of people are mentioning J.L. Collins' The Simple Path to Wealth. Any book by John Bogle, I think that is a really good recommendation. John Bogle is amazing. And one of Dan and I's favorite personal finance books of the last decade it just came out last year, is by Morgan Housel. It's called The Psychology of Money. Oh, there it is. Dan's holding it up right now. The Psychology of Money. The beauty of this book is it's not a bunch of charts, a bunch of numbers, a bunch of statistics. It's a bunch of stories that help you realize that it's your behavior that matters. And it is so good. It is one of my favorite personal finance books of all time. So I really encourage you to get that book. I know we're starting to run out of time here, but we've got a couple other questions. I want to bring it back to pre-service teachers. How do we, I guess this is kind of a broader question. How do we get the attention of teacher prep programs and get them interested in this idea of, infusing the education throughout the curriculum? And anybody, Eric, Mark, Anthony, if you have a thought on this.
I think it's like anything else, and Eric and Mark, I'm sure have a valuable perspective on that. But there are so many things that everybody says has to happen. It's the powers that be, whoever that is, hopefully at the state level, has to decide that this is in fact, this financial awareness, this financial stability, the investment, whatever it happens to be, however you want to put it together, they have to see it as a priority. It's not that anyone dismisses it as unimportant. It's just not as important as some other things that tend to take priority. But I think that comes from the fact that they don't fully appreciate the repercussions of not dealing with it now. I don't want to say they're short-sighted, but we do a lot of short-term thinking about long-term problems. And it's just something that's going to have to change. And a lot of it comes about, frankly, through education and just an awareness that there is even a serious problem out there and how it impacts the students, the teachers, and our culture, our society.
Well, two other quick thoughts. I kind of believe in getting the incentives right. And if you put together some national programs to attract deans and perhaps department heads and chancellors to not only kind of share the words about this, but to make it, to provide additional incentives to try and bring programs to campuses. And so I'm thinking we have a nice package of programs that are easily integrated, educate people about those, and then make the point you're making, Anthony, about how this is of long term so important to the welfare of teachers. And the second thing is I was trying to encourage us to think about getting into a culture that reinforces this idea. We can do the same thing on university campuses. The people over in student advising and financial advising in the student loans and everything, they're very concerned about this. There are other people in your campus, perhaps on the business school, that are very concerned about this. So there may be other alliances that could be established across the campus that could be creative to come up with ways to infuse this at various points in the school curriculum.
Yeah, I think it's probably a long shot, but where I wish some of this would begin, as far as defining the impact, say at a university, is in collaboration with the schools and with the programs coming out of the fiscal affairs, the people that actually deal with all of this every day. And they see some of the consequences of people who are kind of coming back to school. These are teachers trying to come back to school with loans and the kinds of burdens, and they see that every day. And it's really sad, because oftentimes a decision is made that they can't continue because they've just run out of money and the university can't afford to support them. And it's just really sad. And yet these are professionals who've been teaching for years, I think they should play a real role, because they bring a reality to the table that isn't quite as perceived as esoteric by some others who are more hypothetical about it.
I think that's just an excellent point. And I think there might be other allies across the campus too that might be of interest. In your particular case, you've got this, I'm not sure what the name of Tawny's operation is, but certainly she would be willing to help. I know at my university, when I ran the center there, we would be way helpful. And I know some people over in the business school at that time, as well as the financial affairs people, all would be interested.
Yeah. And Tony does, just a quick, we've actually had, she's put on workshops. We've had teachers out of the school show up. So she has done, their organization have done quite a bit. Again, yeah, honestly, it's kind of hard sometimes to get teachers to show up. They are so completely overwhelmed. And again, I don't think they really grasp what it isn't just because we think you should know this. We're actually asking you to make a real investment in your future. Sometimes it's a hard message. It should have begun when they were being trained as teachers, not once they've got into the profession and they're oftentimes just overwhelmed. Later on, they'll wish they had, and that's unfortunate because that just means we missed an opportunity.
These are all great points.
Eric, did you have something to add to that?
Yeah, so I agree with everything, but the lack of financial awareness is just so prevalent in all areas of our society that the people within those programs might not have any idea of what to teach, or might even be in a really, really bad position themselves financially. And so they might not have the information that they need to, teach pre-service teachers about, the intricacies of personal finances, just in general and specific to teachers. So man, we just, general financial education just has to come to the forefront in our society, because it's just everyone in all parts of our society are pretty much illiterate when it comes to financial topics. And it's like, how many financial advisors are dead broke? Right? I mean, so like it's, our society is consumption-based society, and we get into huge debt, and that's just rampant. So just general financial education needs to come to the forefront. And I think it is slowly starting to. Next Gen is doing awesome work, like here at 403B. There's, all these books and podcasts about personal finances, but we have a long way to go.
So I'm going to turn it over to Dan, but I'm going to actually ask one more question. But I'm going to actually ask this question to Dan because, in addition to our amazing panel, Dan Otter also he used to teach at the University of New Mexico pre-service teachers. And so, Dan, how did you approach this topic with your students?
Yeah, so I taught a lot of classes, but at the social studies methods class, the last class, so I think we had 16 meetings. The 16th meeting was all personal finance, and I started off with, you're most likely going to have a pension. Here's how it works. We looked at the actual formula of the state of New Mexico, if you were a teacher there, and then I talked about the supplemental plans. And what would happen was I could tell half were interested, half of those, so a quarter, were really interested. But what would happen would be year 2, year 3 of their teaching careers, I would get emails. I remember you mentioning something, but the reality is, and I think Anthony and Mark and Eric all touched on this, teachers in training, pre-service teachers, have so much on their minds that they get overwhelmed. But that's where I did it, Scott. And again, it almost is a teacher by teacher endeavor, unfortunately. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I have 2 thoughts to add before I thank these wonderful guests. Scott, we're going to change the title of Teach and Retire Rich to It's Okay to Teach and Retire Rich. All right, so we'll give a permission structure for these humanities folks to grow wealthy. And an idea that came to me, everyone who's teaching now probably connected at a high level with someone in their teacher training program. And if we can get current teachers to reach back to those instructors that really made a difference and said, hey, look, something I think that would be really important to share with pre-service teachers is the financial aspects of teaching. And maybe that can be another way that we can come at this. So Scott, we are right up against an hour and 15. When I planned this, I had certain hopes, and they have been so exceeded by our 3 guests. I just, again, So proud to know you, Eric, Mark, Anthony. Thank you so much. And this will live on in the 403BY's YouTube channel. Again, thank you for your insight, your knowledge, your intelligence. But I also want to thank all the pre-service teachers on this call. The fact that you are giving up some of your valuable time now, Mark will probably appreciate this. Your future self will really appreciate you for having for having done this. So thanks again, everyone. I know we're going to stay in touch with our guests. Everybody have a great night. And again, on behalf of Scott and myself, thank you for joining us tonight.